The Texans travel to Lambeau, and CJ Stroud finally gets to directly compete with Jordan Love. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. As always, I'm James Roy, and with me is Tom Chavarria. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm looking forward to this matchup. It is a game of two heavyweights. Really excited. I think this is another great opportunity for the Texans to measure themselves against an elite team in the NFC, and I'm pumped.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is definitely a matchup that I feel like most Texans fans had circled when they saw it. It marks the end of a phase of the schedule that I think we both agreed was going to be the easier part of the Texans schedule. Outside of the Vikings being a lot better than I think most people were giving them credit for at the start of the season, the Texans came out pretty unscathed. 5-1 is a solid place to be going into this stretch of the schedule, but the Packers are, I would say, the first real challenge since the Vikings. It's not any disrespect to the Bills. I just felt like the Bills, with the way their receiving room was shaped up, they weren't like an offensive juggernaut. They were coming off of a drubbing from the Ravens, and so I felt like that was a closer matchup than this one. Or at least I don't know. I don't know how to articulate it, but speaking to that, D'Amico Ryans said today in his press conference, that Jordan Love is going to be the best quarterback the Texans have faced this season. After the Texans have faced Sam Darnold. No, I'm just kidding. Not Sam Darnold. Josh Allen. And so a lot of people are making that into a narrative. I want to talk about that first. So some people are saying that D'Amico Ryans is sticking up for Stephon Diggs and throwing a jab at Josh Allen on purpose. Others are saying that maybe in that moment he was trying to talk up Jordan Love and kind of wasn't really thinking about the quarterbacks they had played before. I would believe, based off of, like I said earlier, this stretch of the schedule being considered relatively light work relative to the rest of the schedule, that he could have just been thinking about the first 6 weeks as a whole and kind of let Josh Allen slip his mind. What are your thoughts on that?
I think he came from a place in which, if you look at Jordan Love's body of work, the first 6 games of the season, he's been statistically better than Josh Allen. So I don't necessarily read too far into the tea leaves of what his, subdued meaning was. Like, this is what I really was trying to say without saying it. I really just think he took a guy, statistically, and said, this is the best quarterback that the Texans will have faced. And I think if you go and you look at what Jordan Love was able to do the week prior and what he's done all season long, he's proven that he's probably the best quarterback they've seen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that a lot of people, I've recently been thinking about it a lot because we're kind of reaching that point in the season, right? There's the early parts of the season where you can kind of get by on your reputation as a team, and people will view your team as what they believe you can be, what they believe you have been. So teams like the Bills, teams like the Chiefs will kind of get a pass when play is less than what it's been because they've been great teams. And so you can't rank them lower. You can't underestimate them just based off of having a couple of bad games to start the season. So with that, I mean, when we look at Jordan Love as a player, the Packers had to decide, are we going to give this guy $50 million after one season of pretty solid play, I'd say above average, and bet on his potential or decide to move on from it? And they obviously decided to stick with it. So far this season, I think that Jordan Love has confirmed that what happened last season wasn't a fluke, and that Jordan Love is, I would say, in that conversation. I think that the CJ Stroud and Jordan Love conversations are not exactly the same based off the fact that CJ's actually a rookie and Jordan Love has been in the league a little longer and had a little more time to cook before he was expected to, feed a family. Overall, I can see where D'Amico's coming from. And I honestly, I don't think it's an invalid thought. I think that Jordan Love is so close to Josh Allen that I don't even think it's disrespectful to say that. Especially if you mean it in a way to prop up Jordan Love as a quarterback, because he has played really well. So I don't have any problem with it. But speaking to Jordan Love and the Packers offense, what are some things that concern you? Obviously, the Texans defense has faced a few injuries. We're uncertain of the status of Henry To'oTo'o going into this game at time of recording. And there's obviously been a bit of a shuffle because to this point, through the first 5 weeks, the linebacker and cornerback rooms played 100% the same 4 players through those 2 positions throughout those 5 weeks. And then this past week was the first time we really didn't do that. But I mean, it was the Patriots. I don't like to underestimate or talk down on an opponent, but I mean, it was not the toughest game to do that in. So this is a challenge, and the Texans defense is kind of in a state of limbo. How do you think that the Packers match up against that? What is their advantage?
I mean, they've got some playmakers that you have to account for. Josh Jacobs was a big free agent signing for them. I think he can hurt you a number of different ways. He looks, similar to what Joe Mixon can do from the running back position. And when you look at that, you really need the linebacker room to be really solid. Obviously, if you looked at what Joe Mixon was able to do against the New England Patriots, he really gashed on some big runs where he got to the second level and then it was off to the races. In the passing game, he was able to get out wide in the passing game and score in that manner too. So for me, that's when I think about the linebackers, that's the first name that comes to mind for me. Obviously, they've got weapons in the receiving room that I think can take advantage of the middle of the football field as well, where these linebackers would be stationed, and it just creates more of a disadvantage for the Texans when you talk about the skill positions that they have that New England did not have. So, they were able to make some plays with guys that I think are lesser than what Green Bay is going to feature, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks. They've got some names that maybe aren't as household names, but are making plays. Obviously, Jordan Love's doing a great job of getting them in positions to be successful. So that's my concern right off rip with the thinking that, if there's going to be a guy that's not in the linebacker room, those guys are going to be able to take advantage.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up Josh Jacobs receiving because it's actually funny. I saw a stat. I believe he's now the record holder for the NFL player with the most receptions in his NFL career without a touchdown, which that was a record that was held, I believe, for, I want to say 60 years. I could be wrong on that one. But, I mean, he does have his threat in the passing game. It's just interesting that they haven't managed to get it to him in a situation where he could score. And the Raiders, obviously, his previous team didn't do that for him either. But I agree with you, especially with Romeo Doubs, who I definitely saw the news around him where he was supposed to be, having a falling out with the coaching staff, and maybe it was going to be a problem. Maybe they looked to trade him or something. And that was something that could have, I think, seriously benefited the Texans because he's a guy that they're going to have to cover in an area where they're really hurting the most. Speaking to the defense outside of how the Packers offense affects it, I want to look to Chris Boyd. So I don't know if Kamari Lassiter is going to play at this time. I had heard the report stated it could be multiple weeks that he's out, so I'd anticipate he'll probably be out this week. Chris Boyd was targeted one time and allowed 9 yards receiving against the Patriots. Do you think the Packers might try and poke that matchup and see if they need to exploit it? Because it didn't feel like New England really cared that Chris Boyd was on the field. They didn't really scheme around trying to attack him. Do you think the Packers maybe do that?
Absolutely. I think also the playmakers, there's a step up going from New England to Green Bay. I also think in the offensive coordinator realm with Green Bay, I think there's a step up there too. I think they're going to look to find mismatches that they can exploit. I think that's how they've been successful so far. You're really going to see this team really get, I think, pressed in ways that they haven't been, just because you've looked at some of these quarterbacks and you've thought, okay, when they get it, when a top flight quarterback comes in and has these, matchups, if he makes better throws, there's big plays to be had against this Texans defense. Now, I think that last week was a great sign. If you're a big fan of getting to the quarterback and being able to pressure that sort of thing, maybe there was plays there that didn't develop because you had such great plays by Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. And Green Bay's been able to gash teams. So my fear is that if they don't get home, because we've always felt, or at least I've always felt, that this team will go defensively as far as the defensive line will take them. While I think the secondary is improved, I think that the theme with this Texan team is if we can get to the quarterback, we get after the quarterback, that's going to be our calling card. That's going to be what makes us successful. And with New England in Lambeau Field, I just feel like that is going to be probably the stiffest challenge from offense versus defense so far that they faced. Nothing against what Buffalo brings to the table, but just everything that I think Green Bay will have in their favor. It's going to be a tough game.
Yeah, and with Buffalo, like we talked about with Indianapolis, with mobile quarterbacks in general, the mission is a little different for this defensive line. So the fact that there was pressure, but it wasn't necessarily getting home consistently, wasn't really an issue because the Texans' mission was to make sure Josh Allen didn't break one. So I can see why that's the case. This is really, truly the first matchup where the Texans will face a team that is legitimately a contender and is probably a team they could see in the Super Bowl if everything shakes out that way. I mean, that's the way I view it, at least. And so seeing how this pass rush performs in this game, I think will be very telling, because I agree with you that the pass rush is going to be vital. And so far, the two games that they've really lit it up have been against rookie quarterbacks and teams that, I mean, the Bears' 4-2 record is deceiving. They're not a 4-2 team. They're just, if you look at their schedule that they've played versus who they're going to play, we're going to really find out if the Bears are for real over these next few games. And then obviously the Patriots, not the best team that in terms of offensive line play that went about as expected. The fact that the Texans got after the quarterback like they did, that was the standard. They accomplished the missions. Congrats, you did what you were supposed to do. Now do it against the Packers. I'll be impressed, right? So I think that'll be a big part of the matchup, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Looking ahead, or looking to the offensive side of the ball, CJ, 192 yards, 3 touchdowns again, and an interception that really wasn't his fault. I would say a solid outing. I'm not a subscriber to he needs to throw for at least 200 or 300 yards. Like 192, people see the 1 in front of his number and they're like, cringe at it. But I'm like, I don't know. CJ had a good game. That's what I'll say. So looking forward, what challenges do you think the Packers defense presents to CJ moving this offense down the field? Because if I'm going to say one name, it's Xavier McKinney is a guy I'm tracking that could potentially throw a wrench in things for CJ Stroud. But how do you see it?
I really think it's going to go as far as the run game. I think you've noticed in 2 games where the Texans have ran the football with success, they've just really been able to dictate what they wanted to do on offense and choose how they wanted to beat you. Whereas in games where they weren't able to run the rock, you really saw them depend on CJ to be elite and just go out and sling the ball over the yard and really, force things for this Texans team to be successful. Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce, if those guys can repeat or get close to the performance they had last week, I think you're going to see CJ be able to have a game where he doesn't need to throw for 350 yards and 3 scores for the team to win. And I think on the road in a hostile environment, to be able to run the football is such a key element. And I think for the Texans, that's going to be something that, they're going to try to do. And some people may hate that. There's a lot of people of the let CJ cook bandwagon, and I understand it. I can totally get why people want the ball in his hands all the time. He's electric. But when you look at what a team is able to do, in time of possession and just really, keeping that defense fresh so they can go out and make plays, I think ideally what the Texans want to do is run the rock.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tom. As per usual, you've really hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is a case where a lot of people, like I said, they'll look at 192 from CJ, and obviously I haven't seen a lot of this on social media. I'm just going from the perspective of I've talked to people, and I know there are fans of the Texans. I've been accused of being a fan who's just looking for the negative in the Texans play. What I'm doing is called being critical of a team that has high standards. So sorry for having high standards. But to critique CJ for having 192 yards in a game where the running game put up almost as many, to me, is asinine. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you can't go after him like that after the run game did what it did. And if the run game can do that against Green Bay, I think that would be huge because, once again, that's another thing. If we look at the pass rush, if we look at the run game, those are 2 very vital elements to this Texans team's success. And the only games they've performed in have been against teams that it's like, okay, cool, you did that. That's what you should have done. Like the Indianapolis Colts run defense is last in the league. Congrats, Joe Mixon. You put up 160 yards. You probably should have done more. Like that defense is a revolving door. You were basically walking through an automatic door into the end zone. And then the Patriots are just a bad enough team that in the natural progression of the game, as we've talked about, a good defense will deteriorate when the offense isn't producing. And so like that happens earlier. Joe Mixon got his opportunities to rack up yards against a defense that was worn out from poor offensive production. So the Packers are, I would say, one of the another, I should say, but we haven't had Joe Mixon or Dameon Pierce for most of the games this season. So this is truly the first legitimate test that they will face in terms of being able to produce in the running game. And to look at CJ's numbers from another perspective, with Nico Collins out, I love Diggs, I love Tank, and they do have the capability to put up those 20 and 30-yard chunk plays. But truthfully, these first few weeks, Nico Collins' ability to get behind the defense, his ability to create the yak has been huge for CJ's yardage numbers. And so to see his numbers drop off that way is not surprising to me. And once again, it's not an issue. We're in a game where the number one stat is the scoreboard. So CJ Stroud put up a win, and that's what matters. And regardless of whether you believe wins are a QB stat or not, it's a team stat, and CJ played a heavy hand in that happening. So I feel really good going into this game, but I do think that this is going to be a close one. And I think that brings us into the point of the show where we kind of run through our score predictions. But before we do that, I want to give you an opportunity. Do you have anything to say to what I just said before we do that?
I think really what needs to be the key takeaway from, kind of stat watching that some people that could have looked at CJ and said, okay, you didn't put up enough numbers, is you had to think about where the Texans were taking over. There were turnovers. They didn't have to travel the length of the field as much. I think their starting field position was something ridiculous, 40, 50 yards, something like that. So when you have a game like that where you're literally only required to travel 50 yards down the football field, drive after drive after drive, because they're getting great field position to start with, there's no way you're going to have these crazy, lopsided stats where CJ's going to throw for, 250, 300 yards, something like that. And the team's going to run for, 100 and I don't know, or almost 200 yards, something like that. So that's really important for me to be able to separate the two, going, well, if their starting field position was like the 20 and CJ didn't have those kind of numbers, then I'm more concerned. The fact that it was more like the 50 and CJ didn't have those numbers, well, he didn't have to travel that far.
Yeah, and I think that this game we'll see CJ throw for 300 just because it's a tougher game. That's like, to me, that's when you look at it and you go, okay, CJ, like 192 against the Packers and we lost by 10. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's when you can start analyzing that number and maybe giving a negative take on it. But I don't have anything negative to say about it as it stands. Looking into this game, I suspect your score prediction is going to be pretty close. I still think I think that for most of the season, with the Texans being contenders, there's not really an opponent where I suspect will give a Texans loss to in our predictions, because even though I did that in my record prediction and both of us still, I pretty firmly believe the Texans are probably an 11-win team. They are capable of winning every one of these matchups. So I would suspect you'll give them the win, but let's hear it, Tom. What do you got?
I'm actually going to do something that I didn't think I was going to do. And I think I'm going to pick them to lose this football game, and will be absolutely happy to say they said, Tom, shut up. I think it's going to be a field goal game. I think on the road, you look at them being able to go into Lambeau Field. I think that's a incredibly tough place to play. Wind, sometimes, cold, although they lucked out. I don't think they're going to get the cold. I feel like Green Bay is going to be highly motivated. They're going to be debuting their ice white uniforms. They just put up 31 on an Arizona Cardinal team that, while I don't think they're great, I don't think they're that bad either. So, and that game was really out of hand early. I think they probably could have done more. They just kind of packed it in. That being said, I believe this is going to be a 27-24 Packers win. It'll be something that, if I was going to do a storybook, 24-24, last team with the football, kicks the game-winning field goal, and just happens to be Green Bay in their building.
I mean, I respect it. I'm shocked because I didn't think that you were going to go that route. But it's funny you bring up the uniform reveal because the Texans so far against throwback and it's really just been throwback, but alternate uniforms, which have been used against them surprisingly often in these first 6 weeks, 33% of the time. The Vikings and Patriots, they are 1-1 in those games. When you remove the trash teams, they are 0-1 in those games. So I respect your opinion from that, totally not related to performance on the field statistic. But I do think the Texans can pull this out. I do agree with you. It's probably the last team that has the ball. So I will give a storybook ending, but I also would like to give like a game script. And I kind of implied this, and obviously the Texans proved me wrong this past week, but it still stands that, in my opinion, especially against good teams, can reasonably be expected to be the game script for the Texans. The Texans show up, they immediately march down and score a touchdown, give up a field goal, march down and score a touchdown, and they're in a game that's something like 14-3, 17-6, like some sort of game where it's like, okay, yeah, you've taken over. That's like, you're in a good spot. You just need to sustain that. And then that's what they do. They try and sustain it instead of, putting their foot on the Packers' neck and just really ending it. And slowly throughout the second half, we'll see the offense stall and the Packers get back in it. I would suspect that it'll be 20-20 sometime late in the game. And then I anticipate the Texans will have the ball last, and Miami will barely make it. I feel like it's important to mention this, not because I believe it, but because it's a common perception that Miami Fairbairn is a dome merchant, as they call it in the kicking game. And Lambeau, as you may know, most football fans do know that it is open air. It's not a dome. But it's not cold weather, so I'm not going to say a missed field goal on Miami's part. Even though he had one last week in an open air stadium. Wow, I'm really putting the pieces together for the opposite of what I'm about to say. Anyway, so I'll go with the Texans 23-20. And I guess that is kind of my storybook ending. Like it's not really a storybook. I'll go game script. It's not really exciting. It's not like, that picturesque, like, oh wow, this is not stressful and I love it. This is like, okay, I've taken my heart medications and I am ready to accept what is about to happen, even though it will be good. So yeah, Miami Fairbairn, last second field goal. The Texans ice it 23-20. Thanks for tuning into the bullpen. We appreciate y'all listening. I know I can speak for Tom here when I say we're excited about this game. I don't feel bad doing that. And I hope y'all are excited about this game. If you are listening to the bullpen for the first time, thanks for tuning in. If you are interested in watching it, we're on YouTube too. And if you're watching it and you're interested in listening, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts on any platform. Just search The Bullpen, a Houston Texans podcast, and we will pop up. I have been James Roy. You can find me at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans fan on Instagram. And speaking to that, if you subscribe to my Instagram, 99 cents a month, I'm doing a giveaway right now. There'll be monthly giveaways. Make sure you're in on that. We're at 10 subscribers. We're really booking it. We're making some headway. So if you like Texans gear and winning it, get in on it. When we get more people, maybe I can give away multiple pieces of Texans gear to 2 different people in the same one. I'm down. I'm game for whatever. I just want people to have more Texans gear. That's the motivation behind that. So get in on that. Tom is at TCTom1 on Instagram, and he is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And that's the best way to reach us. If you want to follow the podcast, the Instagram page, I post a lot of collaborative posts on that. So it's probably a better way to keep up. The Twitter page, I know it exists and I am logged into it. There's not really a lot of activity there. And the handle, so it's at the Bullpen Cast. That also will get you to the YouTube channel if you would rather search it up that way. But as always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.